Welcome back, everybody, to The Creative Moment, Season 6, Episode 4, fresh off our interview with Dave Durham. If you have not watched that episode, pause this one, go check that one out, and then come back.
Yeah, we got to have him back. There's a lot more questions.
We do. That could have been a 2-hour podcast.
Yeah.
But we're here. Dante Bullhauer, Jamie Bullhauer, father and son dynamic duo. Not quite as dynamic as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but I'll save that for when they win the finals. We're here to talk all things creative. This is our 64th episode now, so we've covered a lot of topics, and we're here to cover another one. So let's go ahead and we both got cherry today. That's all I got left.
That's good.
Today we are talking about the importance and kind of the impact of our creative ventures, poetry, photography, kind of how it influences others and how that plays into the growth of the industry in our kind of specific realms. I just hired on a couple employees. He's been to a couple workshops lately. So we've kind of had a couple different but similar experiences that lend into showcasing that kind of impact and influence towards other people.
Yeah. Even for whatever artwork that you have, being aware that it's going to, somebody's going to read it, somebody's going to view it, it's going to have an influence. And not that I think that you should create for the influence. You should not create for the influence. But I think it does touch upon, and just we've had some life dots for us to connect that has highlighted the power of that connection of what we create actually has an influence. There is a bridge that you build to the reader, to the viewer, situation like that.
Yeah, and we've talked about kind of the unseen influence where you don't you're impacting someone, but you don't get to sometimes tangibly feel that.
Yeah.
It's most of the time, I would say, behind the scenes and not really a tangible, like someone doesn't come up to you on the street and say, hey, I read your poem, I looked at your photos, that type of thing.
Someday they will.
Someday
they're going to be like, are you the poet, Jamie Bullhauer? And I'll be like, I'm done. I'm exiting curtain left, whatever, stage left.
Sometime it won't be in western Nebraska. So I'll go ahead and kick you off. You've been to 2 workshops out in western Nebraska.
So, yep.
2 out of 3 weekends, not back to back, right?
Yeah, no, back to back.
Oh, back to back weekends. So what was those experiences like?
Both of them were first half hour of me sharing my poetry and talking about poetry. Then planned workshop after that. And then for the gearing one, we actually had an open mic, which is really actually kind of where this topic really kind of hit home. My first one, though, we actually ended up not doing the workshop because they just kept asking questions. We just kept talking.
Which is always fun.
Yeah, which is always fun. I was like, hey, we can, and they're like, no, read another poem, and just talking about the art form of poetry. One of the board members, he writes for that library, writes his own poetry, and we talked about afterwards, and things like that. What really, though, the second one with the workshop, because everybody stayed for the reading and the workshop, and then a couple people then came for the open mic. It was the second time the library was trying to do an open mic thing, which was cool too. And it was kind of, I did write a blog about it a little bit. Not specifically our topic here, but that the power of creativity and what it can do for the human spirit. And it was really, for even jokingly as I taught, that me being recognized as a poet, both of those events were really rich in the sense of me feeling like that's the only thing they saw me as a poet. Even though I talked about
established entity of...
And so I talked about being a dad. I talked about being a teacher. Like, but it was within that realm. I was still a poet.
It's not Mr. Bullhauer who also writes.
Yes,
it's Mr. Bullhauer, or it's
the
Jamie
author.
the poet. Yeah,
yeah, the writer, the poet. So that was really cool. And in the workshop, especially, I had a wide range. I had some fun learning from them, their backstories and stuff. But they tried the new things. We talked about literary elements. I gave them a poetic form to deal with. But then, and it's a small thing, and I don't want this to come across egotistical, but I kind of helped lead the open mic, so I was off to the side. And as they all delivered their stories and then their poems, afterwards they would always like turn to me, and I know this look as a teacher.
looking for critique.
Critique. How was that? And they enjoyed the moment, though. Everybody's like, oh, this was, we had a really cool community-based thing. But and a couple of the poets were like 70 years old. Like, it was pretty crazy. And they would turn to me as if they were a teenager and look at me like, was that good? And so through that, I did each of them, though I opened up with Wild Death Waits, which is that poem, which is the title of the art. And this is where the influence really came, because afterwards for both places, people talked about their loss. And that one of them actually said, it was like that poem was like right there. Like, it took me right to that hospital room when they lost a brother a lot, and it was really reaffirmed what art is supposed to do, which is build that connection and give people a chance to know that they're not alone. Their feelings are unique to them, but everybody has gone through different things, and that expression of that sorrow, of that moment, I was humbled. I was humbled, especially the first library, like, everybody was in tears. I was just like, they were getting up, getting Kleenexes.
Yeah, so what was that like, being like,
woo!
You almost experience a feeling of it's humbling, it's you feel honored, it's a whole range of emotions. So like, what was that like being poet Jamie Bullhauer and you're the man in the room kind of thing?
It was so behind every open mic, I feel like a poet. Even poetry slams I end up last in. But of their performing, this honestly was elevated because I was seen as an expert. Like, you
were the one speaking.
I was just and they really enjoyed. Even with the poetry workshop, some of the things were challenging, and we discussed, what was it. But they were like, okay, they still did it. Like, they, as I said in the classroom, sometimes make your brain hurt. I warned them, like, okay, this poetic form is going to make your brain hurt, and we only got 10 minutes to try to write this. And they're like, oh. But they went ahead and did it because I was seen as an expert, and they wanted to work on their poetry, and they wanted... And we shared the stuff that they worked on and that, and I was honored and humbled, but I was also, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun getting to do that.
So we talk about a lot the flow on this podcast. Super easy to get into the flow. With that type of stuff. And partly, obviously, anybody who comes to a poetry reading or they know we're dealing with poetry. Like, so there was none of, I don't want to say that sometimes in a classroom you have to kids
spend
don't
more
like poetry. William Wordsworth.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good poet, I guess.
Yes. And so that the energy was already there. And that's really easy then to make the vibe and get people to share, because honestly, at the open mic thing, they all told stories about what the poem, and it was a really powerful moment, and they were pretty open and honest, and I think that's because of the vibe that was set. I was very respectful of their work, and it got them to share, and all of those components that create a little bit of community. So
yeah, kind of like the transition from high school to college. You are now going into a kind of pigeonholed area where it's not, I have to take English or I have to do this. Like if you're a photography major, you care about photography. So your class is naturally going to be more passionate as a consensus about photography than your high school photography class.
Yeah.
Because they're just, it's just that whole dynamic. So recently feels weird to say. Dante Bullhauer Media now includes more than Dante Bullhauer.
Oh boy.
Which is like, it's weird. I mean, I don't really get it, but, and it's they're not like full-time employees, salaried, that type of thing. More contract based. I'm just taking on more than I can bite off myself. So I've hired 2 employees now within the last like 30, 40 days. And it's it's really weird and interesting because both of them said things that really made me just kind of stop and think about the influence that maybe I've had on maybe even creatives that I haven't talked to yet. I mean, I work with a lot of them, know a lot of them, just because I need a lot of help for like state football and all that stuff. But the both of these creatives are just a couple years younger than me. I'm not 102.
Yeah.
About a fifth of that. So I feel very young in the industry, but I also feel very experienced because I've been growing in this for about 5 years, starting as a sophomore in high school.
And the sophomore in high school, one thing people kind of have to understand, you were already working state events then. Mm. You know what I'm saying? Like, you weren't just doing local stuff. So that experience it's like
actual workforce experience, not just hobby experience.
Right. And that's important. I think that's important.
Yeah. And so I had dinner with both these guys. Had dinner and lunch, a meal with both of them. And they both said I kind of started learning photography, videography, all like the digital media world from you. I started watching your YouTube videos. Both of them actually have, like, DM'd me very, very early on in their kind of careers and asked for tips, asked for, hey, should I apply to UNL? How's their journalism program? Stuff like a bunch of stuff. And so for them to kind of share that in those interviews was kind of powerful because I'm just sitting here thinking like, I don't even feel like, I mean, I'm 3 years out of high school and I have people that are like, I grew up watching you and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not grown up. What are we talking about? Like, so it's a very powerful feeling where that, like we talked about, that tangible effect of people look at you as the expert and people look at you as the person that knows more than them and that they can grow from and all this stuff. And it was a very surreal kind of little moment in both of those interviews where I just felt like you can feel the tangible impact and influence that you have on other people. And like we've talked about, a lot of times you don't ever really kind of feel that.
Stephen King has no idea that he's had influence on me ever.
Yeah. You know, like, yeah. So Peter McKinnon will never know that I quote his videos all the time and talk about it on this podcast. But when you get to have those standstill moments of you directly helped me get to where I'm at and you directly helped me learn and all this stuff, it's a super powerful experience and it kind of motivates you in a way. I mean,
do you remember a couple episodes ago I said one of the rewards for being a creative was being a man?
Yeah. And so like I've done 2 separate talks at the same high school, Friday and Monday. So today when we're recording this, but and that's a huge thing too, because there's a kid that actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, like, can we ever just like meet up for coffee and I can just learn from you?" And so I talked with him and stuff on these dates, and that kind of was probably an end to that speech, whatever. But being able to have that tangible, you helped me get to where I am today, is super motivating, fulfilling, all the things. And I don't know, it was just it was weird because me and those people are so close in age that it was just like, you grew up watching me? I'm like, I grew up making me. I mean, what are we doing? But it's a super crazy experience, and something that, like, you know, I feel like with professional athletes or whatever, they get to experience all the time.
Oh yeah.
You know, every game people are chanting your name. There's kids with your jersey on.
Yeah,
and
they
stuff.
do their summer camps,
Yeah.
and everybody shows up.
Yeah, and so for kind of on a very smaller scale, it's very cool, and just kind of highlights the importance of, you know, just being who you are and creating in that same vein, because people look up to, whether you know it or not, your work, your art, all this stuff, and they look up to you, and it's just a byproduct of your work, but it's something that is super important to kind of keep in the back of your mind as you create.
And again, we already said, like, I don't think you should create for the influence, or, you know, sometimes you might have the term selling out to be popular, or
the
some
clicks,
you know, but I'm trying to connect these dots because I got a couple of ideas. Because Chuck D just said something on social media. Here's another person who doesn't know that they had an influence, but he was talking about his song and his songwriting. He said, "I tried to write a song that will last 100 years." And I'm like, ooh. You know, and he wasn't talking about everything that never was put on an album or stuff, and you could talk about how popular they are now, and, you know, but what he was talking about is just standing the test of time, to be an example that doesn't just fade away. And I think that hints at the creative power that we have to be an influence, because if we create something that lasts, then that means there's something deeper there that connects to people over and over again. And I don't think he was being egotistical in the sense of trying to make money. He just said, I'm going to write a damn good song that's going to be powerful enough now. And it just got me really thinking over the last couple of days, because this was just a couple of days ago he has done that. But we have talked about that our most powerful creations that we've done, photographs or stuff, are, again, like you just mentioned, from ourselves. Yep. But I do think you need to remember that connection to the reader, and that's how it becomes something that lasts for a long time. That's something that becomes a positive influence or gives inspiration, so that somebody, you know, goes their own path or wants to try something. And I think it's a responsibility as a creative.
Yeah. Well, and especially with social media, where, you know, everything will last for eternity, basically. It's super important to kind of, like, I like to curate what I put on my business account, and even my personal account a little bit, but because I know that
my personal Instagram,
a bunch of iPhone photos. He has some kind of popping off lately. I mean, Jamie Bohar Media, but that I kind of curate my social media because I know that whether I like it or not, there will be more people than I know that look at it and more people I know that will critique it, good or bad. And so the people that are kind of looking at it and wanting to kind of learn from it, same with like my YouTube, that was brought up in one of my interviews, like I watched your sports editing YouTube video. And funnily enough, they edit very much the same way that I do, which is kind of why I knew it would be a good fit to hire them. But that stuff will be on there for as long as I keep it on there, years, whatever. That stuff I know is going to be seen, however incrementally, like a ton of people or a small amount of people, and it will influence someone else. There will be someone else that watches that video that actually is influenced by it, that won't comment or like it.
Right. And they might disagree, but that's okay too, because it's a learning aspect that we have talked about, that if you are a professional at what you do, you're going to try to learn.
Yeah.
And you can learn from lots of different areas, and disagreeing with it. Like, not everybody likes Stephen King. They, still makes millions of dollars, but people like, he's a hack. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, like I take the yellows out of my gym photos. Some people might be like, I like the real effect of, yes, most gyms are yellow or whatever.
Oh yeah, I just learned something there. That just like, oh, you're right.
My sports video.
I did.
Yeah, it was years ago, 2 studios ago. But so having that kind of baked into the creation of my work and the posting of my work and how I curate that body of work is important, because if I just post like every photo I edit or every this, that, like, I don't want my influence or the impact, the unseen impact on another maybe aspiring creative to be anything less than like Dante Bohauer Media's identity and standard. And so if I just post like, hey, here's the entire set of these family photos, or here's some senior photos I'm not super proud of, but I'm going to post them anyway. It, like, an aspiring creative can see that and think, oh, it's okay to, like, if they've followed me for a long time, it's okay to kind of like not put up the best work type thing, or just the brand varies so much. Oh, some of his work's really good, some of it's bad. I want to like have the consumer and whoever's going to be like influenced by that work say every time he posts it's a banger, or like he holds himself to a standard of his business that he does not drop below. And just thinking about that as you create and post and all this stuff, I think is important, because you don't know what the consumer is going to take.
And you're actually touching on an interesting component in that regard, because we have our video, what do we do with the bad stuff?
Yep.
And things. And I'm actually, though, because you're talking about I got my lunch break poetry series, which is where I'm trying to post a poem. I shoot it with a green screen, edit it, and get it done in my lunch break. And I'm in my tie, and I'm doing all, and it's not the best, though. It's not the best that I could do. I am, though, doing it in a theme kind of idea. And so, but my take on that, though, is I'm doing it for fun a little bit too, but I'm like, hey, here is a way I'm just sharing the poetry, and people like to enjoy it. And maybe because to a degree poetry is so personal, and sometimes people are afraid to share, like my influence is showing that it's okay not to be perfect, but that's 2 different things. Like, I still write, when I'm done with the poem and I'm finally going to put it out there, I try to make sure it is best that I can do. It may not be the best sonnet ever, but it's the best that I've done with that sonnet at that time. So I agree with that expectation. Because I don't think anybody who creates goes like, I'm going to make junk.
Yeah.
The problem is that we have gatekeepers and people who do and say this is bad and it's not. That's a whole nother. We've talked about haters.
And a lot of like my iPhone photos and stuff that will go on my story for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then like just on the business side of things, because my social medias are very much a marketing tool.
Yeah. Yours, mine. Yeah.
But yeah, like my kind of dink and dunk, like, oh, there was like the V of geese flying across my apartment. I just snapped an iPhone photo, posted it to the story of my business account instead of on the feed. I'm just like, oh, it's kind of a fun little photo. I thought turned out good. It was during sunset, whatever.
Yep.
Post that type of stuff. But that, like, even on, I remember that specific post, there were people that slid up and like, oh, this is cool. It's just a fun and very powerful moment when, like you said, you're looked at as on a higher pedestal than maybe even what you feel. I don't look at myself as above those employees or above people that I've kind of helped through the industry. But when they kind of look up to you and your work, it's a super powerful feeling, and it gives you that tangible influence experience that you don't always get through social media of just someone saying like great work or this was powerful, things like that.
Yeah. And we've already touched, just to reinforce, I think you do have to keep in mind though that everything you produce influences someone. You may never know that, and that's the hard part. That's as a teacher, I totally understand that. So many students go out and succeed, and they do, and I hear back from some, but as compared to the numbers that have been in my classroom versus the ones that it's a small amount.
Yep. There's a lot of people that I name in my speeches, whether it's like mental health, digital media, entrepreneur, through the range of it. There's different people that I mention. They don't know that. I forget to tell them that, but they influence me. And that is just a huge part in being a creative, because it helped, like, we're all just trying to grow and learn and be successful in that industry. And Mocha says we should wrap this up, I guess. Yeah. So with that being said, we're on all the social medias. We'll link them down below. Our podcast specifically, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. Every other Tuesday. We've been doing this for 64 episodes now. So if you haven't watched our previous episodes, or kind of a new listener, definitely go check out our last one, interview with Dave Durham. That was super fun. But otherwise, this was The Creative Moment, Season 6, Episode 4, and we will see you in a couple weeks.